Welcome to the Support Raising Solutions podcast, where we help new and current ministry workers grow in being spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded Great Commission workers. Welcome, everyone. This is Callie Davis with the Support Raising Solutions podcast, and I'm very excited to be joined today by Norris. Norris is the Director of Shepherd Training at Standing Stone Ministries, and I'm so excited because you are also one of our public boot camp speakers, and that is something pretty new. So welcome, Lo.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, great. Today, we want to dive into kind of the topic around making the ask, or really the thought of the walls you hit when you're wondering, what is the other person thinking on the other side? And Lo, it was great. You sent me some of the thoughts that you've been kind of mulling over around this. And I know you have great personal experience with this as well. How about you just kick us off?
Well, I was excited about the topic that you proposed because it's a very relevant one. I think it's relevant for any person that's in the process of raising their support, whether it be starting out of the gate from scratch or someone who has been doing this for years, because I feel as though it's a great opportunity to recenter ourselves and to remind ourselves of, what began our journey in support raising. And because it's such a relevant topic, I feel like it would be helpful for a wide range of your audience. And the fact that I get to be the one that chimes in on it makes it even that much better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I loved the thought that you kind of started off with about the idea that we're governed by social norms and etiquette. That was a thought you'd sent me. Mm-hmm. And that just resonates so much that I think I hear often from people when they're stepping into support raising, when they're going through training or coaching, and the idea is, well, you don't understand. We don't talk about money like that. Or no, I can't ask someone. That's just not what we do. And that's what they're hitting on, that social norm, that kind of community culture. Can you dive in? What does that mean for support raising? How do we respond to that?
Yeah, it's all around us. It's so pervasive. It creeps into our lives in ways that we can't possibly imagine, from, the way we act when we're in our cars. And it's like, oh, well, if I change lanes too fast, it's going to look aggressive and that person's going to be upset. It's like perfect stranger. We have no idea who this person is, but because we have, certain common courtesies. And on the flip side, there's also certain offenses that we feel, when somebody treats us a certain way, or they talk or they bring up certain topics, they're almost kind of off the record. And one of the things that I work with regularly, and I think this is falls in the category of being encouraging to anyone who's listening, is, the people that are worried about offending other people are the last people that usually offend other people. Mm-hmm. The people that are offensive are the ones that have no clue of how brash or how brazen they are. And so the very fact that you're worried about how the conversation is going to go means that you're holding a certain social tact. And so I am a big fan, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, in a moment, is to, rather than get caught up in the exhausting dance of social acceptance and how is somebody going to respond to this, is to shift the paradigm off of the audience that we are talking to and shifting the paradigm back onto the ultimate source of our calling and the ultimate source of why we are so passionate about this, and spend more time orientating ourselves with how we're positioned with God as his spokesman, as his called missionary in our specific field, and then allow all of those other dynamics to fall into place, because we're acting out of our confidence in something way more stable and more universal, and that's our acceptance and calling that God's issued to us and God's declared over us, rather than what man thinks.
Oh, that's huge. Well, and I think that's the heart of support raising that we often drift away from, that it is not about us. It's not this transaction between us and whoever we're meeting with, that we're going to say the right thing and they're going to give us the right money. It is 100% about us responding to God's calling that he's given us, and us inviting others to equally ask God, what is he calling them to do?
Right. A fundamental wrestling match. We have to go through that. Is, Lord, is this of you?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this my harebrained idea, or is this your kingdom, suggestion? Is this your kingdom opportunity? And that, whatever work we can do wrestling on the front end with that, the more benefit and the less pain and frustration and fear and doubt, all those major objections that we come up against, and all that internal wrestling then becomes much easier. But we have to do the work and sit and listen to the Lord before we launch out.
Yeah. Now I am curious, what social considerations do you take though? Because there is still some awareness of what the other person, how they're receiving this. You want to communicate effectively and sensitively. So how much do you change or look at what you're saying to the other person based on how they'll hear it?
Well, there's a lot of power in a personal time of pause before you're having any conversation with an individual relating to support raising. Whether it be calling for an initial phone call to set up the appointment, or whether it be a face-to-face appointment or Zoom in today's age, or whether it be the follow-up call, because that's our lives we might have an agenda, or we think that we know where we want the conversation to head, but being able to pause and just create space for the Lord to say, to give us insight, or to refresh our memory of things that are going on in the other person's life. Being more sensitively aware. I'll use this example. I was at a public boot camp as a leader, and we've started to challenge ourselves as leaders to go and make support raising calls alongside the attendees as kind of an act of solidarity. And I'm going to call this guy, and I'm going to call this guy, and I'm going to talk to him about the ministry. It's been a long time. I feel like I've got the right rapport. And I called him up. I'm like, hey, buddy, I'd love to meet with you and your wife and talk to you about my ministry. He's like, well, you can meet with one or the other. And I was like, oh. And so in that pause, the Lord really shifted me, saying, you know what, this call started with a certain agenda, but it's now shifted to a different agenda. And now the ministry of support raising has taken a very obvious and immediate turn towards caring for an individual in their time of need. And so the value of just stopping and pausing and saying, okay, Lord, is there anything else that you are drawing me to reach out to this person for, that I need to be spiritually sensitive of? I feel like that is a great discipline to help create an awareness of a situation, rather than just being very narrow and myopic tunnel vision towards, I need to get the appointment. I need to make the ask. It brings the human spiritual side into what we're doing with the ministry of support raising.
Well, yeah, these are people. They're not cookie cutter donation machines. And so even if it's not probably that hopefully more rare situation that everything gets derailed to have a very different conversation of just caring and listening, even if they're in a good place to be hearing about ministry and meeting with you, it's still listening. It's still listening and hearing. And are they aware of ministry? That's going to shift your conversation. Is this a completely foreign topic? That'll change how you share things. Are they in the middle of just a really busy life? They're juggling their kids. That'll shift how you set up the appointment. Absolutely. Treating them like a person. It seems so small, so natural. And yet I think we miss it a lot.
Yeah. The partnership starts way before the first donation comes through.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's your first interaction at the very beginning of this whole process with any person. The first time you reach out to them.
And I feel in our ministry, we care for pastors. We pastor pastors, giving them a place to talk off the record. But regardless of what ministry field you're in, how somebody feels cared for in the appointment setting phone call, and how they feel cared for in the face-to-face appointment, how they feel cared for in the newsletters, all of that is a reflection of how you're caring for your ministry field. And so being able to be consistent with those relationships, I think, is a very powerful way for your ministry supporters to realize just what you're bringing to the people that you're called to serve. And they're just an extension of that ministry.
Wow. Yeah. Now, can we look at the flip side of the coin? Definitely wanting to be sensitive and compassionate as you're hearing from someone. But what about when you're the person that's kind of holding this situation or holding the conversation back, that you're assuming things, you're jumping to conclusions about how things might be interpreted, and you just like, maybe I shouldn't ask. I should. Nope. They don't seem like they want to hear anything. I should just pack up and go. This isn't a good time.
Yeah, I just taught about that, and I think it's 1 Corinthians 12. It's all the bodies, the many parts, one body. Mm-hmm. And there was two distinct postures in there. There was the person that was like, well, but I'm not needed, not needed. And the other posture is like, well, I don't need you. And both of them are a form of pride. And so the example that you're giving is this sense of false pride of like, well, they're not going to, want to hear from me. They're not going to be excited about what I'm doing. And the reality is that that mindset it derails what God wants to do with your ministry. And so I would coach somebody when I have the proper rapport. I would coach somebody basically saying, it's not about you. Like, why are you making this so much about you? Like we have a tendency, there's a fine line between being socially sensitive to what a conversation is, how a conversation is going, and how the other person is receiving it. That's one thing. It's a good discernment tool. It's good to be compassionate and empathetic. And there's another side of it, which is just straight laziness. And it's just a straight sense of procrastination and laziness. And realizing that the trap that we fall into is like, well, I'm not really hurting anybody by not going out and raising the support that my organization has said I need to do, that God has called me to do, and that I myself really want to do. But if I don't do it, it's not really hurting anybody. And the reality is that I would want that individual to ponder. It's like, what if there are people that are counting on you to show up? What if there's people in the missions field that are praying and you are the answer to their prayer, whether it be a pastor that I work with, or whether it be an orphan in a different country, or whether it be a ministry leader that needs desperately for you to show up. There is a real, I guess you would say it would be the act of not doing something that actually deprives individuals of being helped. And then, for those of us who have families, what does that translate to for our own stability at home? And is that a loving and caring posture towards our spouse, our children? In the video from one of the boot camps, it talks about, the gentleman who's like procrastinating and not wanting to pick up the phone. And that it ends up on a happy note, but the conflict that's poked fun at is real when it comes to the strife between husbands and wife and not being able to afford to do these things. So I would say that there's to be very careful and to be very honest with yourself. Is this a discerning cautionary posture of not picking up the phone and not making calls and not raising support? Or is it just an act of laziness? And if it is an act of laziness, that's dangerous water to be treading on when it comes to not answering the call that the Lord's put on our hearts.
Yeah. I loved what you said. It's not about you. And that just reminds me, there was a line that Steve Shadrach, I think he said it in passing, and it just light bulb moment. I've held on to that thought for years. And it was, can you ever truly call someone a friend if you haven't asked them for support? And at first, that's really bold. I don't think I've asked every one of my friends, but it was this idea that this is about something so much bigger, that God is moving and he is calling people. And why would you ever withhold an opportunity to invite someone to that?
Yeah.
And it's talking about something so much bigger than you, and you being a little uncomfortable and you having to kind of persevere through some awkward moments, some kind of pushing through some things you don't want to do, but because it's about something so much more, that it's worth pushing through. It's worth calling the people that you're not sure what they're going to say, because it's not about you. It is about what God is doing. And that makes it so much more exciting. Honestly, that's why I love support raising, because it's not about me.
And what you just said starts to involve a sovereignty issue. It's like, people aren't going to say yes and no, based on whether you give a really killer presentation.
Right.
It's the heart of the matter, and God's sovereignty is like, man, all he's asking us to do. One of the things that I think is key, I say this in our boot camps, is we're not in the results business. We're not here to monitor and hold you accountable for results. The question is, do we have the activity that is going to allow for the results to come in? I was given a great analogy about, they was using a sailing analogy, and it was like, our responsibility is just to put the sail up. It's not our responsibility to bring the wind about.
Right.
God will bring the wind. God will bring the power. God will bring the energy to the equation, but we have to put the sail up. We have to put ourselves in a position to where we are actually obediently sharing the mission. And to that point is like, how big is our God if we're worried that he can't do this? And that's another fun topic.
Absolutely. Probably another topic for another day. There's a whole lot there. But I was just thinking about the people I've heard present to me and share their ministry and invite me. And it goes like two very different pictures depending on if they are talking about something that they're so excited this is God is doing, and he's building a team, and that they're sharing with me, and they just can't help but say, this is amazing. Do you want to be a part of it? Like you can see they're getting excited, and they're probably a little nervous too, but it's such this amazing passion that they can't help but say, this is amazing. I think you should be a part of it too. Right. I'm like, that's amazing. I think you're right. And then you have the other people that are really excited, but somewhere in, as they're transitioning to the ask, they just start shrinking and they just start pulling back and like, well, we're raising support, and would you want to give to us? And you can just see that their vision for what God is doing got so separated from their ask.
Yeah.
And their ask just was, hey, we need money. And maybe they didn't use those words, but that was their posture. That was their tone. That was what they felt like they were saying. And those two people could be doing the exact same thing. But one of them got the fact that it's the vision, and it's the vision is what gives that power to the ask, because it's not about us. And the other one had that same vision, but had this massive disconnect. And you saw it in the confidence when they were asking, because their ask was about them needing money instead of challenging someone to, what is God calling you to do to be a part of this?
There's no easy way to short circuit this process. There is such a valuable importance of practice and getting in the routine. Everyone that's listening to this podcast is probably an expert in some way. And what I'd want you to hear is, you're an expert. You have tools and talents and abilities that have only been given to you. You're a one-off masterpiece. Your experiences, those inherent abilities, all translate into a one of a kind. And you were given some of those talents, and you were given some of those spiritual giftings, but other things took practice. It took repetition. It took showing up and doing it over and over and over and over again. So for any of us to think that somehow we're just going to show up into this support raising world and feel comfortable or feel as though we have arrived and we have it all figured out, we're setting ourselves up for a reality check. And so rather than that, what I've seen to ring true in my ministry and in my support raising efforts is that the more I do it, the more natural it becomes. The more I minister in this space that God's called me to, the more confident I get. The more I communicate the stories of what God's doing through me, the more natural those stories become. The more I pick up the phone and walk through the the relational side of support raising, the more it becomes a natural extension of what I am doing in my personal life, in my ministry life, in my social life. So you cannot fast track that process. You have to get that momentum going. And the bad news is that there's no way around it. But the good news is that the more you do it, the more everyone in your ministry is going to benefit, because you're just going to become a more well-rounded version of yourself. And sure, we might fumble through the first few appointments, and we might stumble through the first few appointments after we haven't done it in a while.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not going to decide that's not going to be the make it or break it point of somebody deciding to get involved. And so that boldness in the ask is realizing that you don't have to nail it. You just have to show up. You just have to engage. You just have to pick up the phone and dial, and then have confidence that the Lord's going to take that conversation from there. And he's going to do things that you could have never anticipated, just by simply being willing to say, okay, Lord, I will do this because you have called me to it.
Wow. Well, I feel like we're not going to hit a better point in this conversation. That was amazing. Lo, is there any final thought you do want to add?
Going back to that one body, many parts, is that I just want you to have permission, you being everyone that's listening out there, is to not compare yourself to how other people are doing, how people are succeeding, or how people are within your organization or other missionaries. I would want you to embrace the journey that God has in store for you. I would want him to, in the same way that you recognize that you're a one-off masterpiece, to realize that his path for you may look totally different than what other people's paths are. But the best practices, the disciplines that come with a lot of the content from the SRS team are what hundreds and thousands of people that have found themselves in your shoes have gone through. And so trust the process. Have confidence in who God has made you to be. Have an excited anticipation of what he's called you into. And trust on the practice of kingdom builders that have gone before you, so that you can too be excited and see how God's going to reveal himself, how his faithfulness is going to show up, how his love for you, how his generosities for you is going to show up, so that you can be a walking example of what God can do with a willing person.
Wow. Well, thank you, Lo. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and just the thoughtfulness you bring to casting vision for how to step into the support raising space. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be of value and service to all you out there listening. And I appreciate your inviting me on to do this today.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, Lo is also writing an article about the same topic, and that will be released probably a couple of weeks after we publish this podcast. So you can find that at supportraisengsolutions.org/blog. So you can hear more from Lo in just a different format. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us, and blessings and best wishes upon your support raising journey. Thanks for joining us today, and please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode as we work to give more insight into building and maintaining your ministry partnership team.